Gordon, I'm keen for your take on the US response so far. What impact will the sanctions announced have on Russia? Some argue, as you know, that the sanctions imposed don't go nearly far enough.
Well, certainly this is an opening salvo in which is going to be a long process, both in terms of sanctions and the U.S. response. Thus far, I must say I'm pretty pleased. The process of diplomacy is very difficult. And we've seen a remarkable effort, not just on the part of the United States, but other partners around the world and NATO, including Australia, in marshaling an international response to Russian actions. As we've seen, the Russians' actions are taking places in stages, and I anticipate that any economic response or political response will also take place in stages. So early steps of what is a very somber and concerning situation.
And so if sanctions are the opening salvo, what would be the next steps that the US would be considering?
Well, again, sanctions themselves have many, many layers. And I think, when you get to the point where you're really serious is when you begin to cut off Russia from its lifeblood. It's been said that Russia is a gas station or a petrol station masquerading as a country. Their lifeblood is their energy sector. In the now nearly 30 years since the end of the Cold War, they have not invested in their people. They have not invested in innovation. They have not invested in kind of building a modern society. And as a result, they remain extremely vulnerable to the energy sector, which is why the decision this week, again raised by Germany, to cease or at least to halt the Nord Stream gas pipeline is a very significant one. Obviously, there's a lot more that can be done. There's a lot more that can be done on targeted sanctions, and there's a lot more that can be done by countries like the United Kingdom, which plays home to an awful lot of Russian money and Russian oligarchs who are a key support base for Russian President Putin.
When we look at military support from the US, just how much military support has the US given Ukraine in recent weeks, months, years?
And again, this is not just the United States. This is United States plus NATO. One of the delicate lines that the U.S. President Biden has had to walk, and most other countries has, is there's no public stomach for U.S. direct involvement in a war. And given the fact that Russia is a nuclear armed power, it's extremely dangerous as well. And so there's been a need to project a message clearly that the U.S. was not committing itself to fight. To put troops in Ukraine, but at the same time to supporting Ukraine's endeavors. So that has been in the forms of arms. And again, not just the United States, but Germany and the United Kingdom, et cetera, continue to do it in that process. And then bolstering those countries that border Ukraine. So today, a lot of the focus is on preparing for an anticipated flood of refugees that might be coming into to Poland. You would like to think in a just world that the entire international community would stand up against Russia, making a decision to attack a sovereign, independent country, unprovoked, a country that poses no threat to Russia whatsoever, and which represents the greatest threat to national sovereignty since Iraq invaded Kuwait back in the early 1990s. And yet, the consequences of that such that this is going to be a staged approach.
Gordon, I know you're stressing NATO's role in all of this. There has been the suggestion that the expansion of NATO has led us to this point. Is that a valid argument?
No, not at all. In the end, NATO hasn't expanded. It certainly hasn't expanded to Ukraine. That's not on the cards. It's not on the table. In fact, if anything, Putin's demand that it not happen has made the fact that we really can't formally take it off the table precisely because of that. But the notion somehow that this is about NATO expansion really belies kind of a broader understanding of Vladimir Putin's objectives in terms of essentially righting what he thinks is the greatest wrong in history, which was the collapse of the Soviet Union. And in his case, he wants to reconstitute a Russian empire. So he rejects modern nation states. And his speech that he gave this week, a very passionate and emotional speech, made it very clear that he does not recognize the sovereignty of Ukraine. He thinks it should be part of Russia. And I actually, for your viewers who haven't seen it, there was a speech given in the United Nations this week by the ambassador from Kenya, who basically just blasted this view. Every African country, most of them in South America and Asia, have borders where they have people with their ethnicity on other sides of the borders, and yet they respect the modern nation state, and they respect moving forward in the future rather than looking towards the past, right? And I'm afraid that countries like Russia, or even the United States or Europe with some colonial histories, don't necessarily realize how much it is a norm to have to deal with modern borders as they are. But our only hope is to go forward.
It's fascinating to watch how the dialogue about Russia and Ukraine is playing out within the United States. When Republicans in the US claim that Putin wouldn't have invaded Ukraine if Donald Trump was still president, do they have a point in that Russian relations were very different under the former president?
Well, they have a point in that Donald Trump would have welcomed them in on a red carpet and said, sure, take it. We don't care. Just remember how much pressure the democratically elected president of the Ukraine was under from Donald Trump. And so to see the former U.S. president come out today and call Putin's movement on the breakaway republics of Donbass and the others as genius and to praise him is just an absolute shocker. I mean, think about this. The Republican Party of the United States went from 2012 with Mitt Romney on the debate stage calling Russia the United States' greatest geopolitical foe, to today having the standard bearer of the party and potentially its next candidate coming out and continuing to, as he has for 5 years, to fawn all over Vladimir Putin, calling him a genius, calling him wonderful, and having major organs of the Republican Party praising Vladimir Putin and defending his actions. It's just something I have a hard time still getting my head around today. There was a great article in the Australian yesterday by Paul Kelly, one of our national kind of standard bearers on this, that really lambasted the former U.S. president for that position, as well as those supporters of his in Australia, that I think their position will become increasingly untenable in the days to come as we see what happens in Ukraine.